I have a lot of personal feelings about the actions of President Putin, and I do not want him welcomed as any sort of hero. He is a war criminal, and I think making sure that Alaska isn't used to somehow platform him as a return to the world stage. I mean, that's a fear that I have. I don't want my city and my state to be used in that way.
Let's take you then from the front line to Anchorage, where we will be concentrating for the next, 24, 48 hours as people there await the arrival of President Trump and President Putin. We can speak to Alaskan Representative Andrew Gray. Andrew, good afternoon from us. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are things in Anchorage? Is there a sense of significant anticipation, I suppose, awaiting the arrival of these two leaders?
I think folks are talking about it. So, this is definitely something that's on people's minds. I think Anchorage looks and is functioning the way it normally does, unless you're part of the venue that's expected to host the event. I think those folks are obviously functioning differently than usual, but the city as a whole looks fairly normal.
In terms of the sort of reception that these two will get, will it be warm?
So Alaska voted for President Trump by a margin of about 13.3%. He has a lot of support in the state. Our state went very strongly for President Trump. So I think there are folks here who are excited that President Trump will be in our state and in our city. That said, I know there are some protests being organized. There are some folks who are not happy. Democratic district in a part of East Anchorage that voted for Kamala Harris and voted for me. So my constituents are not excited about the meeting. So it's a bit of a mixed reception, I'd say.
We also know, Andrew, that there are 1,000 or so Ukrainian refugees in Alaska. And I do wonder how they are anticipating the arrival of President Putin onto their doorstep.
Okay, that's a very complicated question. So since 2022, Alaska has accepted more refugees than at any time in its history. The vast majority of those refugees were from Ukraine. Many of those Ukrainians have settled in the Matsu Valley, which is a Republican conservative stronghold in the state, and politically they fit in very well there. In fact, some of the politicians who worked hardest to get more Ukrainians to Alaska are might be described as far-right politicians. So Ukrainians fit into a very weird political world in which most of their politics aligns with President Trump. On this particular issue, though, it's complicated. That said, some of the Ukrainian leaders I've spoken to are critical of Volodymyr Zelensky. They are obviously, they have families in cities that have been bombed by Russia, and they have heartbreaking stories to tell about their own loss related to the war in Ukraine. But I think when you start to dig into the politics and their feelings, it's complicated. I don't think any of them want Trump to capitulate to President Putin in any way, shape, or form. I don't think any of them believe that Putin is a good leader in any way, shape, or form. But that said, I think it's a more complicated question than you would think.
Yeah, and thank you for unpacking it for us. I didn't appreciate all the complexity that comes with that. In terms of how the Ukrainian refugees that are there will respond, I mean, they've been living their lives as normally as possible, I presume, working, living, etc., even with families still in Ukraine. I imagine some even still fighting as well on the front line. I wonder if they will make their voices heard this weekend, or do they just carry on? Yeah.
So we have about 1,000 Ukrainian refugees. Those are folks with official refugee status. The actual number of Ukrainians that we've taken is probably 10 times higher than that. And that may not seem like a lot to your listeners, but in a state of only 760,000 people, an additional 10 to 12,000 people is actually quite significant. Ukrainians in general are skilled workers. They're providing essential work here in Alaska. President Trump revoked the type of visa that many of them had. Didn't renew it, I should say. Didn't revoke it, but didn't renew the type of visa that they had. So there has been a lot of uncertainty about their status in the state and their ability to do their work. We have placed a lot of pressure on our federal delegation that interacts directly with the White House, explaining how important this type of immigrant is to our state, how much we need them to do essential jobs here. But he hasn't renewed their status. So again, I think they will be under the radar. They'll be under the radar because we're currently living in an environment where if you're an immigrant who doesn't have legal status, you're at risk of being detained. And so our entire refugee community is extremely careful not to be quoted in the media, not to be seen outside holding up a sign. So I would be quite surprised if any Ukrainian refugees at all made their voices heard.
Gosh. Just a final question for you, Andrew. We're very glad for your time. Alaska is the centre of the universe this weekend. It's but a couple of miles from Russia at its closest point. What does this moment mean for Alaska and for the history of Alaska? Is it important to you that a summit of this level is held there?
So I think Alaska often feels left off the world stage. So I think having the world focused on our state and our city, they're in some ways we're proud to show off the amazing natural beauty that we have. The fact that many folks wonder if we have stores. I think just showing that we're a legitimate city, I think is something that we're proud to show off to the world. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety about what will actually come out of this meeting between the two world leaders. Yeah. I think, for me personally, I lived in Estonia for 3 years when I was younger, 20 years ago. I have a lot of personal feelings about the actions of President Putin, and I do not want him welcomed as any sort of hero. He is a war criminal, and I think making sure that Alaska isn't used to somehow platform him as a return to the world stage. I mean, that's a fear that I have. I don't want my city and my state to be used in that way.
Yeah. Andrew, thank you for speaking to us on the programme. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks now. That is Alaskan Democrat Representative Andrew Gray. Well, as the fighting rages on, there are reports that President Trump could allow Vladimir Putin to sell Ukraine's rare earth minerals on the open market if he were to sign a peace deal. How important is that for a stalling Russian economy? Christian Natoyu is an associate professor at Loughborough University, London, and an expert on relations between Russia and the West. Christian, good afternoon.
Thank you for having me on the show.
It's a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for joining us. We've talked in the past about a Ukraine minerals deal being part of any peace settlement. That talk kind of went away. Does it seem to you like it would be a realistic way forward towards peace?
Well, I think the rumors that we've been hearing recently about Trump seemingly allowing Putin to sell rare earth minerals from the eastern part of Ukraine on the global market is not really related to the discussion we had at the beginning of the year around March. And it's a bit confusing to think about it. How can the United States actually allow Russia to sell rare earth minerals, natural resources that belong actually to Ukraine from a legal perspective? And on the other hand, from the point of view of the Russians, they wouldn't be really having a market where to sell them besides China, because China actually has an almost virtual monopoly. So it controls 95% of the supply chains that are involved in the exploitation of rare earth minerals, rare earths as well, and all the way the chain that goes from the place they're exploited up until they're manufactured. So it's a bit counterintuitive to think about the fact that Russia can be swayed by these rumors that the United States will actually allow Moscow to sell these rare earth minerals on the global market. But at the same time, if Russia does want to sell these rare earth minerals to the United States, it does need a sort of legal backing from the United States, because at this point, it would be illegal for Russia to sell any natural resources that pertain to the territory of eastern Ukraine. And for the United States, especially for Trump's strategy of becoming self-sufficient in terms of trade, you've seen all of the discussions about imposing tariffs, about bringing back jobs and industry to the United States. Having access to rare earth minerals, given the fact that China has almost complete monopoly on the supply chains around rare earth minerals, is crucial. So I would presume that Trump will seek to have some sort of deal around Russia selling those rare earth minerals to the United States and not to China.
In terms of the economic opportunity that this summit may present, I was struck by comments from Yuri Ushakov, who is the Kremlin's top foreign policy aide, and he seems to be, I suppose, looking forward to what economic potential there might be here. Here's the quote from him: a belief that there is enormous untapped potential for trade and economic cooperation between the countries. Is there anything in addition to rare earth minerals that we should be listening out for in the press conference that will follow the summit tomorrow?
Well, in terms of economic cooperation, I think we might hear something around cooperation in the Arctic. There are other types of natural resources, mainly oil and gas in the Arctic, where the United States is very much interested in having some level of control over them. And again, the China factor comes into question, where China has been making quite a lot of overtures towards Russia in trying to secure different types of partnerships for exploiting those natural resources in the Arctic. But other than that, I think the Russians really can't afford to criticize or not to be enthusiastic about any proposals or rumors of economic partnerships coming from the United States. I think they're cautious. I don't really think that they're expecting too much to come out of the summit, but at the same time, they're not in a position to reject it.
Yeah.
Probably most of the most, let's say, important outcomes that we'll see will probably be around some sort of treaty or discussions about renewing various treaties on arms control and nuclear non-proliferation that both the United States and Russia basically went out of during the last 2 decades.
Really good to speak to you, Christian. Who knows where this summit is going to end up, but it's good to have knowledge like yours going into it. Thank you very much, Christian Nitoyu, an Associate Professor at Loughborough University, London.